Hal was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. He came in early, did his work, and went home. That was the whole of it. He fixed what was broken, replaced what was worn out, and kept the lower corridors of the Dern facility running the way they were supposed to. Nobody noticed him much. That was fine. Hal had never needed to be noticed. The facility was a large place. It sat on the edge of the city like something that had always been there, wide and gray and full of noise during the day. Dragons and humans worked inside it together, which still felt strange to some people, but not to Hal. He had been working there for 6 years. He was used to the heavy sound of wings folding in the upper halls, used to the low rumble of dragon voices carrying through the walls. It was just work. It was just life. He had a small set of rooms not far from the facility. Nothing special. A bed, a table, a shelf with a few tools he kept clean and sharp. He walked to work every morning before the sun was fully up and walked home after it had gone down. In between, he carried his kit bag through the lower corridors and fixed whatever needed fixing. That evening was no different from any other, or so he thought. He was finishing up near Corridor 4, tightening a loose pipe bracket that had been rattling for 2 days. The corridor was quiet at that hour. Most workers had already gone up or gone home. The lights along the ceiling gave everything a dull, steady glow. Hal knelt on the floor, wrench in hand, and worked slowly and carefully the way he always did. It was when he stood up and reached for his kit bag that he saw it. It was lying against the base of the wall, half in shadow. At first he thought it was a piece of scrap, a bit of wood that had come loose from somewhere. He almost left it. But something made him stop. He took one step closer, then crouched down to get a better look. It was a toy. A small dragon, carved from pale wood, no longer than his hand. It had jointed wings that were meant to move, strung together with fine cord. The carving was careful and detailed, scales marked along the body one by one, a small open mouth, tiny claws at the end of each leg. Someone had painted it too, a deep reddish-brown with faint gold along the wing edges. It was the kind of thing that had taken a long time to make. The kind of thing made with love. One wing was broken. It had snapped near the joint, and the piece hung by a single thread of cord, nearly falling off. The body had a crack along one side. The paint was scuffed. Whatever had happened to it, the fall had not been gentle. Hal sat back on his heels and looked at it for a moment. He did not know how it had ended up here. Maybe it had fallen from a bag. Maybe a child had dropped it and not noticed until it was too late, and by then they had already gone too far to find it. He did not know. What he did know was that something this carefully made did not belong on a cold floor in an empty corridor. He looked up and down the hall. Nobody was there. He checked the time. The facility's lost and found shelf was on the upper level, and the desk there had been closed for an hour already. Hal picked the toy up carefully, the way you pick up something that matters. He turned it over in his hands, looking at the broken wing, the cracked side. He pressed the loose wing piece gently back into place. It would not hold without work, but it was not beyond repair. He had fixed harder things than this. He reached into his kit bag and pulled out a square of clean cloth, the kind he used to wipe down tools. He wrapped the toy in it slowly and set it at the top of his bag where it would not be knocked around. He told himself it was simple. He would take it home, fix it properly, and bring it back in the morning. Leave it at the lost and found shelf with a note saying where he had found it. That was all. It was not a complicated thing. He picked up his bag, switched off his work light, and walked toward the exit. The city outside was cool and quiet. Hal walked his usual route home, bag over one shoulder, boots soft on the pavement. He thought about the toy as he walked. He thought about who it might belong to. A child, clearly. A young one, probably, given how small the thing was. He thought about a child somewhere in the city who had gone to bed that night without it, who might have cried, who would not understand where it had gone. That thought settled somewhere in his chest and stayed there. Back in his small rooms, Hal set his bag on the table and took the toy out carefully. He unwrapped it and set it under his lamp, where the light was good. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. The break was clean. That was good. A clean break was easier to work with than a split or a splinter. He could shape a small wooden peg to reinforce the joint, use a little fine glue along the crack, record the wing once the repair had dried. The paint could be touched up if he mixed carefully. He had a small tin of red-brown paint left from a job months ago that looked close enough. He went and got his tools. He worked slowly and without rushing, the way he always did when something mattered. He carved the small peg by hand, taking his time with it. He set the wing back into place and held it steady while the glue took hold. He propped it carefully on the edge of his tool tin to dry while he worked on the body crack, pressing the wood gently back together and sealing it clean. By the time he was done with the repairs it was late. He left the toy sitting under the lamp to dry fully overnight, the broken wing held back in its right place, the crack sealed, the cord restrung and knotted off neatly. He looked at it one last time before he turned in. It looked like itself again. Small and careful and made with love. He was glad he had picked it up. He was glad he had not walked past it. He cut a small square of paper from his notebook and wrote on it in plain, clear letters, "Found near corridor 4. Hope it finds its way home." He folded the note and tucked it beneath the toy's front claws so it would not be missed. Then he turned off the lamp and went to bed. He did not think much of it after that. It was a small thing. Someone had lost something that mattered to them, and now it would be found again. That was all. That was enough. Hal did not sleep well that night. It was not the toy that kept him awake. Not exactly. It was something quieter than that. A feeling he could not quite name. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about small things. About the way the wing had snapped clean. About the fine cord that had been used to string the joints, not cheap cord, not the kind you found in any market stall, but something thin and strong and carefully chosen. About the detail in the scales, each one pressed in by hand, one at a time, by someone who had not been in a hurry. Whoever had made that toy had cared very much. And whoever had owned it had cared very much too. You could tell by the wear on it. The paint along the neck was faded in a particular way, the kind of fading that comes from being held in the same spot over and over again. Small fingers, probably. Holding it the same way every time, the way children do when something is truly theirs. Hal turned onto his side and closed his eyes. He was up before his alarm. The room was still gray and quiet when he pulled on his clothes and moved to the table. The toy sat exactly where he had left it, beneath the cold lamp, the note tucked under its front claws. He picked it up and turned it over carefully. The glue had dried clean and firm overnight. He pressed the repaired wing gently, it held. The crack along the body was sealed. From a distance you could not see it at all. But up close, under good light, Hal could see that the repair was not yet finished. The wing he had reset was slightly duller than the other one. The paint had been disturbed where he had worked the glue in, and now there was a pale, dull patch near the joint that caught the light wrong. The cord he had restrung was the right weight, but the color was a shade too light against the wood. And the body, though sealed, had lost some of its polish along the repaired line. Hal set the toy down and looked at it for a moment. He had time before his shift. Not a lot. But enough. He went to the shelf above his work table and found the tin of red-brown paint. He pried the lid off and looked inside. It had dried a little at the edges but the center was still good. He took a fine brush from the glass jar where he kept his small tools and sat down at the table under the lamp. He worked carefully and without rushing. He touched up the dull patch near the joint first, layering the paint in thin coats the way you were supposed to, letting each one sit for a moment before adding the next. He matched the tone as closely as he could, feathering the edges so there was no hard line between old paint and new. Then he moved to the body, running a thin line of paint along the sealed crack and blending it out until the repair disappeared into the grain of the wood. When the paint had dried, he took a small square of soft cloth, the kind used for polishing lenses, and buffed the whole surface of the toy slowly and evenly. The wood began to shine. Not a bright shine, not like lacquer, but the warm, quiet glow of wood that has been looked after. The kind of shine that takes time to come out. He held it under the lamp and turned it slowly. The wings caught the light the right way now. Both of them. The cord at the joints sat dark and even. The scales along the body showed their detail cleanly. The small open mouth, the tiny claws, the faint gold along the wing edges, all of it was there, the way it was meant to be. Hal set it down and sat back. It was a good repair. Honest work. Not perfect, he knew where every mark was, knew where the glue had gone in and where the paint had been touched, but good. Solid. The kind of repair that would hold for years if the toy was looked after. He found himself hoping it would be looked after. He reached for the square of paper with his note on it. He read it over once. Found near corridor 4. Hope it gets home. Simple enough. Clear enough. He refolded it and slipped it beneath the toy's front claws again, making sure it sat flat and would not fall off in a bag. Then he wrapped the toy back in the clean cloth, this time a little more carefully, tucking the edges in so nothing could press against the fresh paint. He set it at the top of his bag where he always kept the things that needed handling gently. He ate a quick breakfast standing at the counter, drank his tea, rinsed the cup. Then he picked up his bag and went out into the morning. The city was just beginning to wake up. The sky was pale at the edges. His boots were quiet on the pavement and his breath showed faintly in the cool air. He walked the usual route, the same one he had walked for 6 years, and did not think about much. The facility was already open when he arrived. A few workers were moving through the front corridors, heads down, starting their day. Hal signed in at the lower desk and took the stairs up to the main hall rather than the lift. The lost and found shelf was on the far side of the hall, near the staff notice board, behind a low wooden counter where the desk attendant usually sat. The desk was not staffed yet. It was still early. Hal stood at the counter for a moment. He looked at the shelf behind it. There were a few things on it already, a folded jacket, a pair of work gloves, a key card in a small envelope. He looked at the space between the gloves and the key card. Enough room. He reached into his bag and took out the wrapped toy. He set it on the shelf carefully, the note still tucked beneath the claws, visible just above the edge of the cloth so that whoever found it would see it straight away. He made sure it was not too close to the edge. Made sure it was steady. Then he straightened up, picked up his bag, and walked away. He did not look back. He did not wait to see if anyone noticed. He went down to the lower corridors, took out his work list for the day, and got started. There was a stuck valve on corridor 2 that had been reported twice already. A ceiling panel on corridor 6 that needed reseating. A drainage grate near the east stairwell that was beginning to rust at the edges. Hal put the toy out of his mind and got to work. That was the whole of it. Something had been broken and now it was fixed. Someone had lost something and now it could be found. He had done what any decent person would do with a spare evening and a steady hand. He did not think it would come to anything more than that. Mira had not eaten her breakfast. That was how Dern knew it was serious. She was a young dragonling, small even for her age, with pale amber scales and eyes that were usually bright and curious about everything. She was the kind of child who asked too many questions and laughed too easily and left her belongings in every room she passed through. Dern had told her more than once to be more careful with her things. She had nodded and promised and then done exactly the same thing the next day. But she had never stopped eating before. She sat at the morning table with her food in front of her and her eyes on the floor and did not touch any of it. Dern watched her from across the table and said nothing at first. He waited. He had learned that waiting was often better than asking. Eventually she looked up. Her eyes were red at the edges. She had been crying, he realized. Probably since last night, probably quietly, in the way she cried when she did not want anyone to hear her. "It is gone," she said. "Just that. Nothing more." Dern set down his cup. "What is gone?" "The one grandfather made me." He understood then. The carved dragon. The small wooden one with the jointed wings that she carried everywhere, that she slept with, that she had once brought to a formal hall dinner and refused to leave at the door. His father had made it for her the winter before he passed. Carved it himself, scale by scale, over the course of 3 months. It was the only thing she had of him that was truly hers. Dern kept his voice level. "Where did you last have it?" Mira pressed her lips together. "I think it fell. When I came to visit you at the facility. I had it in my bag and the bag was open and I think," she stopped. Her chin was shaking. "I will find it," Dern said. He said it simply and without hesitation, the way he said things when he meant them completely. Mira looked at him for a moment, then nodded once and looked back at the floor. Dern arrived at the facility earlier than usual that morning. He did not make an announcement. He did not send someone else. He walked the route Mira had taken when she had visited 2 days ago, through the main hall and down toward the lower corridors where she had come to meet him near his afternoon inspection. He checked the floor as he walked. He checked the corners and the edges of the walls. He found nothing. He stopped at the lower desk and asked the attendant on duty if anything unusual had been brought in. The attendant checked the log and shook his head. Nothing from the lower corridors. Nothing matching that description. Dern went up to the main hall and stood for a moment, thinking. It was one of the other staff members passing by who mentioned the lost and found shelf. Dern walked to it without hurrying. The desk attendant there, a young woman named Petra who had worked the shelf counter for 2 years, looked up when he approached. She straightened immediately. "Lord Dern. Has anything been brought in recently?" he said. "A toy. Small. Carved wood." Petra's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly. Something more like recognition. She reached beneath the counter and lifted something wrapped in a clean cloth and set it down in front of him. Dern looked at it. He reached out and folded back the cloth. The carved dragon lay inside, still and perfect, its wings set correctly, its surface polished and warm under the hall lights. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands the way Mira always did. He checked the wing that he knew had been cracked once before. Mira had dropped it from a height 2 years ago and his father had repaired it then. He found the old repair and next to it, a new one. Careful. Clean. Honest work. There was a note tucked beneath the front claws. He read it. Found near corridor 4. Hope it gets home. No name. No expectation. Just a plain sentence in plain handwriting on a square of notebook paper. Dern stood very still for a moment. "Do you know who brought this in?" he asked. Petra nodded. "I wasn't at the desk when it was left, but the corridor camera would have caught it. I can check if you'd like." "Please." It took less than 10 minutes. Petra pulled the footage on the hall monitor and found the timestamp from early that morning. Dern watched the screen. A man came into frame, average height, work clothes, kit bag over one shoulder. He set the wrapped toy on the shelf carefully, adjusted it once so it would not fall, and walked away. He did not look around to see if anyone had noticed. He did not wait. He simply left. "Who is that?" Dern asked. Petra looked at the image. "I think that's Hal. He works the lower corridor maintenance." Has done for years. Dern looked at the screen for another moment. Then he said, find out what shift he is on today. He took the toy with him. He went home at midday rather than his usual evening. Mira was in the front room, sitting near the window, not doing anything. She looked up when he came in. He crossed the room without a word and held the toy out to her. She stared at it. Then she made a sound that Dern had no name for, something between a sob and a cry and a breath all at once. And she took it with both hands and held it against her chest and bent over it the way small creatures do when they are holding something they thought was gone forever. Her shoulders shook. She did not speak for a long time. Dern sat beside her and said nothing. He put one large hand gently on her back and let her cry herself out. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were wet and her voice was thick. Where was it? Someone found it in the lower corridor, Dern said. They took it home and fixed it and brought it back. Mira looked at the toy. She turned it over and found the repaired wing. She ran her small claw along the joint, feeling the work. Then she looked up at her father. Who? A man named Hal, Dern said. He works in the building. Did he know it was mine? No, Dern said. He did not know whose it was at all. Mira looked back at the toy. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, she said, he fixed it anyway. Yes, Dern said. He did. He said it simply. But something had settled in him since he had stood at that lost and found counter and read that small plain note. Something he did not yet have the right words for. He had overseen the facility for 11 years. He had worked alongside humans for most of that time. He had respected them in the way that any reasonable leader respected those who worked under him. But this was something different. This was a man who had found something that did not belong to him, had given his own evening to restore it, and had asked for nothing. Had not even left his name. Dern looked at his daughter, still holding the toy with both hands, and made a quiet decision. He was going to find out who Hal was. Not to reward him. Not yet. Simply to know him. Hal received the message just after lunch. It came through the internal system, printed on a small white slip by the desk terminal near Corridor 3. One of the younger staff members brought it down to him while he was reseating a ceiling panel on Corridor 6. Hal read it once, folded it, and put it in his shirt pocket. It said, "Please report to Lord Dern's office at the end of your shift. 3rd floor, East Wing." Hal went back to the ceiling panel and finished the job. He told himself it was nothing. He worked through the rest of his afternoon list the same way he always did, methodically, without rushing, checking each task off as he went. The stuck valve on Corridor 2. The drainage grate near the east stairwell. A loose floor plate near the service lift that had not been on the list but needed doing anyway. He did all of it. His hands were steady and his mind was on his work. But the slip of paper sat in his pocket the whole time. He could not think of anything he had done wrong. He had not missed a shift. He had not left a job unfinished. He had not broken anything or mishandled anything or filed a wrong report. He went over the past 2 weeks in his head as he worked and found nothing that would bring him to the attention of the 3rd floor. Except the toy. He thought about that as he packed up his kit bag at the end of the day. He turned it over in his mind carefully. He had taken something from the corridor. He had taken it home. He had brought it back. He had not reported finding it through the proper system, he had simply left it on the shelf with a note. Maybe that was it. Maybe there was a procedure he had skipped without knowing. He washed his hands at the corridor sink, put on his jacket, picked up his bag, and took the stairs to the 3rd floor. The east wing was quieter than the rest of the building. The floors up here were a different material. Something smoother and darker than the lower corridors. The ceiling was higher. The lights were warmer. Hal had never been up here before. He walked slowly and read the door plates until he found the right one. He knocked. A low voice said, "Come in." Hal opened the door and stepped inside. The office was large. Not in a showy way, but in the way of a room that simply needed to be large to fit the person in it. Dern was seated behind a wide desk near the far window, and even seated he was an imposing figure, broad across the shoulders, dark-scaled, with eyes the color of deep amber that settled on Hal the moment he entered and did not move from him. Hal stopped a few steps inside the door. He held his kit bag at his side and stood straight. "You are Hal," Dern said. It was not a question. "Yes," Hal said. "Sir." Dern looked at him for a moment without speaking. It was not an unkind look. It was the look of someone who was taking their time, reading something carefully. Hal held still and waited. Then Dern reached to the side of the desk and lifted something and set it down facing Hal. The carved dragon. Sitting on the desk between them, wings set, surface polished, the note still folded beneath its front claws. Hal looked at it. Then he looked at Dern. "You found this," Dern said. "Yes," Hal said. "In Corridor 4. 2 nights ago. You took it home." "I did. I know I should have. I meant to bring it to the shelf that same night but the desk was already closed. So I took it home and brought it back first thing in the morning. I left a note saying where I found it." He paused. "If there was a procedure I should have followed, I apologize. I did not think of it that way at the time." Dern was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You repaired it." "It was broken," Hal said simply. "The wing was snapped and the body had a crack. I had the tools and the materials. It did not seem right to leave it broken when I could fix it." Dern folded his hands on the desk. His eyes had not moved from Hal's face. "That is what I want to ask you about," he said. "Why did you fix it?" Hal opened his mouth and then closed it again. He had not expected that question. He had expected to be told what rule he had broken or what form he had missed. He had not expected to be asked why. He thought about it honestly for a moment. "Because it was broken," he said, "and I had the skill to fix it." That seemed like reason enough. "You did not know whose it was." "No. You did not know if anyone would ever claim it." "No," Hal said. "I didn't. But you spent your evening repairing it. You used your own materials. You polished it and restrung the joints and touched up the paint." Dern paused. "And you left no name." Hal shifted slightly. "It wasn't about me. I just didn't want something made that carefully to stay broken if I could help it. Whatever it was, someone had made it with a lot of care. That deserved some respect." The room was very quiet. Dern looked at him for a long moment. Something had changed in his expression, though Hal could not have said exactly what. It was not surprise. It was something slower and deeper than surprise. "This toy," Dern said at last, "was made by my father. He carved it for my daughter the winter before he died. It is the only thing she has of him that was made by his hands." Hal said nothing. He felt the weight of that settle in the room. "She had not eaten since she lost it," Dern continued. "When I brought it back to her she wept for a long time." He paused. "The wing you repaired," she ran her claw along the joint and felt the work. "She asked me who had done it. I told her a man named Hal. She asked if you had known it was hers." Dern's eyes were steady. "I told her no. You had not known. You had fixed it anyway." Hal did not know what to say to that. So he said nothing. "In our culture," Dern said quietly, "craft given freely, work done with skill and care and no expectation of return, is not a small thing. It is considered one of the highest things a person can offer. Not because of what it costs in materials or time, but because of what it says about the person who gives it." He paused. It says that they see value in the world beyond what is useful to them. Hal looked at the carved dragon on the desk. He thought about the quiet evening at his table, the lamp, the small brush, the careful coats of paint. It had not felt like anything grand at the time. It had felt like an ordinary evening doing an ordinary thing. I was just doing what seemed right, he said. I know, Dern said. That is exactly what I mean. The amber eyes held him for one more moment. Then Dern sat back slowly, and something in his bearing shifted, not less formal exactly, but less distant. You may go, Hal, he said. Thank you for coming up. Hal nodded once, picked up his bag, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back once. Dern was looking at the toy. Hal left without another word. He took the stairs back down to the lower corridors and walked out into the evening air. The city was cooling around him and the sky was going dark at the edges. He felt strange. Not bad. Just strange. Like something had shifted somewhere without him quite seeing it happen. 3 days passed and Hal heard nothing. He went back to his work the way he always did. Corridor 2, Corridor 4, the east stairwell, the service lift. He fixed what needed fixing and moved on to the next thing. Nobody said anything to him about the third floor. Nobody mentioned Dern or the toy or the meeting. Life in the lower corridors went on exactly as it always had. Hal told himself that was fine. He had not done anything expecting a result. He had fixed a broken toy and left it on a shelf and that was the end of it. The meeting had been what it had been. He had answered honestly and gone home. There was nothing more to it. He almost believed that completely. On the fourth morning he found a second slip waiting at the desk terminal near Corridor 3. He read it standing up, the same way he had read the first one. It was short. Shorter than the first. You are invited to the Dern Household Hearth Day gathering this Saturday evening. Arrival at 6. The address is enclosed. Your attendance would be welcomed. Hal read it twice. Then he looked at the address on the smaller card beneath it. It was a part of the city he had walked through but never had reason to stop in. A quiet street, well kept, not far from the northern edge. He folded both cards and put them in his pocket and went to work. He thought about it all day without meaning to. Between jobs, between corridors, in the quiet moments when he was packing up his kit or waiting for a seal to dry. He knew what Hearth Day was. Everyone who worked alongside dragons knew what it was, a family gathering, held on a fixed day each season, where the household came together around the hearth fire. It was not a party in the way humans used the word. It was something older and more serious than that. A marking of time. A coming together of those who mattered to the family. It was not the kind of thing you invited outsiders to. He went home that evening and sat at his table for a while without doing anything. He looked at the space where the toy had sat under his lamp 4 nights ago. The lamp was still there. The tin of paint was still on the shelf. The fine brush was back in the glass jar with the others. He thought about Mira, who had not eaten her breakfast. He thought about Dern's voice when he had said she wept for a long time. He thought about the way Dern had looked at the carved dragon on the desk between them, and the way the room had gone very quiet. He wrote back the next morning. A short note, plain and honest. Thank you for the invitation. I will be there. He sent it through the internal system and went back to work. Saturday came gray and cool. Hal finished his morning the way he always did, then went home and changed into the cleanest clothes he owned, dark trousers, a plain collared shirt, boots that he polished until they were decent. He stood in front of the small mirror above his wash basin and looked at himself for a moment. He looked like what he was. A maintenance worker in clean clothes. He decided that was all right. He left early enough to walk. The northern streets were quiet in the early evening, the lamps just beginning to come on, the air carrying the smell of cool stone and something woody from the trees along the road. He found the street easily enough. The houses here were large and set back from the road, with wide doors made for broader frames than human ones. He stood outside the right address for a moment. Through the front wall he could hear voices. Low ones, warm ones. The sound of a household that was already gathered and already comfortable. He could smell something burning slow and clean, hearth wood, real wood, the kind that gave off warmth for hours. He raised his hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. It was not Dern. It was not an attendant either. It was Mira. She was smaller than he had imagined, though he did not know why he had imagined anything at all. Pale amber scales, bright eyes, a slight frame wrapped in something dark and simple. And in both her small clawed hands, held tight against her chest, was the carved dragon. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Then she said, very seriously, "Are you Hal?" "I am," he said. She looked at him for another moment with the careful, measuring look that young children sometimes have when they are deciding something important. Then she stepped back from the door and held it open wider and said, "You can come in. I saved you a seat near the fire because Father said you might be cold." Hal felt something shift in his chest. Something warm and unexpected. He stepped inside. The hallway opened into a wide central room where the hearth fire was already going, large and steady, casting a deep amber light across everything. There were others gathered, family members, he assumed, some dragon, some mixed company, all settled and relaxed in the way of people who had been comfortable with each other for a long time. Conversation quieted slightly when he entered, not unfriendly, just the natural pause of a room noticing a new face. Dern was standing near the far side of the hearth. He looked at Hal across the room and gave a single slow nod of acknowledgement. Not formal. Not the nod of a lord to a worker. Something more level than that. Hal nodded back. Mira had not left his side. She walked with him to the seat near the fire. A solid wooden chair with a cushion on it, placed close enough to the hearth to feel the warmth, and stood beside it while he sat down, as though she was making sure he was properly settled before she let herself relax. When he was seated she climbed onto the smaller seat beside him and set the carved dragon on her knee and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "Father told me you fixed the wing," she said. "I did," Hal said. "And the crack on the side?" "Yes." She turned the toy over in her hands and found the repaired wing the way she always did, running the tip of one small claw along the joint. She was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled beside them. Around the room the conversation had picked back up, soft and steady. "Grandfather made it," she said. Not sadly. Just as a fact she wanted him to know. "I know," Hal said gently. "Your father told me." She nodded. She turned the toy once more and then held it still. "I was going to ask Father to find the person who fixed it," she said. "Because I wanted to say thank you. But then Father said you were coming here instead." She looked up at him. "So. Thank you." Hal looked at her. Small and serious and holding her grandfather's toy with both hands. "You're welcome," he said. And he meant it in a way that went further than the words. Mira seemed satisfied with that. She turned back to the fire and settled into her seat the way children do when they have decided they are comfortable. After a moment she leaned slightly toward him, not much, just enough, the way you lean toward someone when you have decided they are safe. Hal sat in the warmth of the hearth fire in a room full of strangers who were becoming less strange by the minute, and looked at the carved dragon on Myra's knee, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Across the room Dern watched them both for a moment. Then he turned back to his conversation and smiled, quietly, to himself. No titles had been given. No rewards had been announced. No speeches had been made. Something far better than all of that had simply happened on its own.